Jamaica. This is ever so often the cry of many women in our society, where they're abused by their counterparts. There's little to no help that is offered to them, and sometimes it ends up that the woman is killed, or it ends up that the woman defends herself and then murders the man. And it is a reoccurring situation in Jamaica. But tonight, Jamaica, I'm going to spend some time with Professor Wendel Abel. We're going to spend some time with Professor or Dr. Wendel Abel. He's a leading Caribbean psychiatrist who he understands a myriad of issues that happens in the Jamaican and the Caribbean space. So I'm going to invite him now on this platform. Good night, Dr. Abel.
Good night. How are you doing?
I'm well. Welcome to PDTV News, Jamaica. Prof. Abel, you heard what is happening to that young lady and her boyfriend. And the issue of domestic abuse and trauma is a big one in the Jamaican society. Can you explain tonight to Jamaica the history that affects so many of Jamaicans being bitter, angry, violent? Can you get into that tonight?
Well, I hope I can. I think I'll be able to do so.
Okay. So Jamaicans are asking who is Professor Abel. Dr. Wendell Abel is one of the leading psychiatrists in the Caribbean when it comes on to the issues of mental health. And you want to tell them a little bit more about you, Dr. Abel?
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right. I'm a psychiatrist and I work at the University of the West Indies where I am professor. Um, and I have been working as a psychiatrist for almost 30 years now. A lot of people I know who is a psychiatrist, but some people are not clear.
Mm-hmm.
A psychiatrist is actually a medical doctor who treats conditions of the mind,
Yes.
but we're also trained in a broader way. We're trained in human behavior, yeah, and so apart from treating people in medication and so on, although people think that's all we do, but we also do therapy. And
Yes.
so, but even beyond that, the thing is somebody has a problem, they come to us, we're able to work with them, evaluate the situation, find out what are some of the problems, and treat accordingly. It might be if the person's brain is affected or their behavior and they need to be on medication, then we have to put them on medication. But the truth is, the vast majority of people, most people who come, they need to be on medication, right?
Mm-hmm.
For lots of people, you work with them to deal with situations and so on. So, like the case that this lady just spoke about,
Mm-hmm.
is really what it is. It's really domestic violence. Or
Mm-hmm.
nowadays, I give it a fancy term, which they refer to as intimate partner violence,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that is violence in a situation where you are intimately involved with another person. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's really it's I mean the everyday term is domestic violence,
Mm-hmm.
and in this situation, what I'm hearing is a young lady who is in a situation where she's actually being abused
Yes.
physically, probably emotionally by her boyfriend. And in many situations, the violence, um the victim is usually is a woman, right? But you do have situations that like a domestic violence in which the males,
Are
right,
also.
a man is also the victim, yes, and the perpetrator is his partner, who is a who may be a female or otherwise, you know. So
Mm.
so the truth is, so the point I'm making is that not only women find themselves in situations where they're victims of violence, but whatever it is domestic violence. And as a young lady pointed out, it can be very dangerous. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of women or individuals find themselves in situations like this, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that if you find your situation, if you're in a violent relationship, if you can't work it out and sort it out, then you should get out,
Mm.
right? Pick up yourself and run out of it. Um, because in many instances, it may that violence could result in death of a
Yes.
person, right? Or
Mm.
sometimes even if it's not death, you know, it's really a traumatic experience for an individual to be living in a situation like this. Um, well, as was pointed out in this situation, though, this person seemed to be in a very desperate position where she wants to get out of it and can't get out, and she claimed, right, or her friend or the person who spoke to you has claimed that she has reported it to the police several times and that she's not getting any help and so on. The truth about it is that I'm not trying to minimize or say not no goes or it's not true,
Mm.
because that's what happened to a lot of people in situations of domestic violence,
Yes.
that people shame them and blame them because of the situation in which they are in, and sometimes say is love them love, you know. In fact, in our culture,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people attitude towards people who are in those situations is that is love the person, love the beating while they stay in it.
Oh Lord.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are actually some women, who will tell you that they keep going back in the relationship because they like when man lick them and beat them and that sort of thing. But the truth is that if one finds one that they're in a situation like that, um, a lot of times you feel actually feel helpless and powerless, right? And you reach out. The thing to do is to reach out for help. And what I hear in this situation is that this young lady has reached out to for help, and she has gone to the police and so on. Although, as I say, I don't have to be very careful because I don't want to put the lady down and blame her or shame her or anything like that, right? But one would have hoped that the police is more responsive, because I must say nowadays that police are more responsive to situations like this, yes, and they will
Well, I can also equally differ
yeah,
because I've seen instances where the police have said, "Oh, I love triangle, may not get involved in that."
true. True, it and that happens. It does happen because and you know why sometimes the police don't get involved as they should,
Yes.
because maybe, and I'm not, again, I have to be careful, because in them situation there we must judge people and blame them and shame them, right? But a lot of times the woman may go to the police and report it, right? And the police intervene and so on, and then afterwards you go back in the relationship, because that happen a lot of times,
Mm.
right? People keep going back in the relationship, so you go through a cycle. In fact, this kind of violence is a kind, sometimes is a vicious cycle. You have a violent situation, you're beaten or you curse or you put down, are treated badly emotionally and so on. And you keep going back to to the situation. And a lot of people go back into this situation, because and you kind of make up back because of sex and that sort of thing, because and
Mm.
that make it a kind of vicious circle and a vicious cycle. Yes. Um, but in truth and in fact, I mean, this lady has done the right thing, right, which is to report it, and I hope, um, you know, I would hope that she really gets the sort of help and support she should from the police.
Well,
Yes.
she's crying out that she's not getting the help. She's crying out that the situation has become very embarrassing to the point where the man has come to her workplace and embarrassed her. And she really
Yes.
saying, it is overwhelming now, it is too much, I can't continue like this. But in all of that, Dr.
Mm.
Abel, there is an underlining theme where
But
we have to look at, and that
yes,
is the trauma of our society where our
yes,
men are abusive to our women are toxic to our men, mothers are toxic to their children, their children who are abused by fathers or mothers. There are so many things that have caused this level of toxicity and trauma in our society. Can you touch on that a little for me tonight?
right. And before I touch on it, is that this lady also has another option. She can take out a restraining order on this man, right? So that he
Mm,
doesn't turn up where she live or doesn't turn up at her workplace, right? So, that's another option she has. And we have
the
to remind people that they can exercise it, although it's sometimes not easy, because people find themselves in this situation there where they're constantly beaten and battered. It is sometimes very difficult for them to take action. Sometimes they don't even want to take action out of fear for them, for their life. But
mm.
um but I just want to close off this section to
But
say
then you would
to
argue equally that many times in Jamaica, not even the restraining order works. It don't
that
work.
is that is true, that could happen sometimes. Yes, but it's part it's sad, and it's part of the reality. But I just want to say, increasingly, our the system is getting better at that. And I know a lot of people are say, when I say are foolish, it's know when I talk about and so on, right? But we have to do what we can do to deal with the situation, right?
Mm.
But let me come back to the issue of trauma,
Yes.
right? Or and especially what we call childhood trauma, because that is really what I want to focus on tonight. And childhood trauma has to do with any situation that is distressing or
Mm.
potentially life threatening that children find themselves in.
Yes.
And this situation is like um, physical abuse. So a child who maybe, let's say, um, you have a woman who is experiencing a similar situation to what you just described, and she
Mhm.
has a child who grows up in a situation like that. That child is subjected to trauma, right? And it's which is, I mean, violence within the home. But
Mm.
we have other situation like physical abuse where the child is is constantly beaten. In fact, in many situations in Jamaica, when we say we're punishing children, it's really not punishment, it's really abuse, trauma, right? Because of how violent the abuse is, right? We beat them sometime. In fact, what you come and hear a mother say, or a father, we're going to beat, not going to, I will beat you until you're dead, or I'm going to murder you,
Mm.
right? And we think sometimes it's that we're disciplining children. It's not discipline, it's physical abuse, right? There's also emotional abuse, right? In which we treat children badly emotionally, like you do it like the things you say. You get up every morning, you tell the pitney that they're worthless and they're not gonna come out to anything good.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
them worthless like them pooper, common expression. Or
Mm-hmm.
even the child who probably goes to school and the teacher tell the child that the child
Now come on.
lazy and then come out to anything good. And sometimes even in the classroom, the child is actually beaten physically, yes? Um, and every day children go through situations where, for example, they shame them and they blame them for things. So the child who
Mm-hmm.
um, may not be doing well in school,
Yes.
you tell them so then dunce and then worthless and things like that. And there are lots of people who listening to you who actually experience these things and they have experienced them as children and
Yes.
don't really recognize that what they experienced as a child was actually trauma, childhood trauma. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
um let's look at another one, which is a tough one, which is sexual abuse of children.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very common, right? Where you have big grown adults who actually abuse children sexually.
Yes.
Yes. And that is very difficult for children, because the adults, and who are sometimes some of these people who do that to children, then sometimes usually be like the bigger cousin, sometimes even bigger brother or sister, right? Sometimes it's a stepfather, right? Or an uncle or even grandfather or somebody, a family friend, right?
Our
Will
neighbor
sexually, our neighbor, right?
or the mother visitor.
The mother visitor, the mother visitor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sexually abuses children. And the sad thing about it is that, and the thing about it is that for many of these children, it's something that happen repeatedly over and over again. And can you imagine a child who got through these experiences, how difficult and traumatic it is for the children? And a lot of times when the children now go to the mother, yes, and report it, or to grandmother, because sometimes they're living with their grandmother and auntie, and they go to that person and report it. Either the person no want to listen, or tell them to shut up, or
Right.
tell them that, look here, me no want you mash up my relationship or my marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or just tell them, say, I like the telling, you know and for children who have gone through this, it is
Yeah.
very traumatic, and I'm sure there are people who are listening to you tonight who have had
Yeah.
experiences like this. And for many people, even as big people in adults, they hold it a big secret and not tell nobody, because the shame, or they were blamed as children, or they never had anybody who they could talk to or share it with, and so on. And they've had to carry this pain and shame, um, I mean, buried in their body all their lives. And it affects you in the long run. So we talk about the abuse, but there's also neglect, um, physical and emotional neglect. Children who have grown up in homes where um, parents don't pay attention to them, never pay any attention to them, yes,
Mm-hmm.
and neglect them. They never get enough love and attention and care, or situations where, your mother, for one reason or the other, father, just couldn't afford it, couldn't manage, and have to take you and send you go live with your godmother or your auntie
Mm-hmm.
or cousin, just pick you up and just send you go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those things are trauma and they're difficult for children. And I know a lot of people who listen to your program tonight, are people who are abroad, outside of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of them too have their children living in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And we know, I'm not criticizing anybody, but because they want to get a better life, seek a better life,
Yes.
what they do is they migrate.
leave the children with the grandmother, the aunt.
Leave the children behind with grandmother, godmother, sometime auntie, sometime a friend, yes?
Mm-hmm.
And they think that, um, some of them do their best. I mean, put down nobody, tear nobody apart, right? But the reality is, the only contact they have with their children is the things they send them, the barrel. Although people now send barrel so much again, they send money, right? So they can buy things, so the children can get everything. And they think, yes, we know that they're abroad working hard, a slave through the snow, do two, three job, and I do their best to the children, the child or the children they leave behind.
Mm-hmm.
But they know that the truth is children need more than that. Them need love and attention. Worse, if you leave them with people behind, that child grows up feeling that he or she, as a child, has been neglected and abandoned and rejected by the parent. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be very difficult for children, right? Very difficult for children. And a lot of people, as I talk to you tonight, early morning, right, have gone through these experiences, and it is painful. The adults who are listening to me can understand these things because many people have gone through these experiences.
Yes.
Other forms of trauma is like if you grow up in a home, well, I just said it before, like where you get up every day, every night, your parents are quarrel and fight. You see your father beat your mother, your mother beat your father,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is traumatic and painful. That sort of environment for children to be growing up in and living through. And it's traumatic, it's difficult, it's painful for them. Or
Yes.
sometimes, it may be growing up in a family where um a family member has a mental illness, that can be a difficult environment for children to go through. Yes. Or and we're looking at what we call situations where that cause trauma for children. In fact, we have a term we use for that nowadays that we call adverse childhood experiences,
Yes.
right? ACEs.
Mm-hmm.
A is adverse, C is childhood, E is experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So these adverse childhood experiences are trauma situations that children live in. Also, as I say, living in a home where parents fighting, quarreling. Some
Mm.
parent may have a mental illness, or a father, um, usually father, a family, a parent who has been um, put away in prison, incarcerated, that can cause traumatic situation, trauma for children. We sometimes don't think about it, but it is very difficult for children going in situations like that. Another what we call ACEs, and I encourage people to go and read on it and look it up. It's a lot of information is on that in the internet. If you grow up in a home where one of your family member, like one of your parents, has died or
Yes.
is no longer in the house, whether they dead naturally or gunman shoot them, or they migrate and so on, that is also one of the situations we refer to as adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Yes.
Mm.
Another big one is growing up in a community, right, where there's a lot of violence, where you're exposed to violence. And this
Mm.
is a big one in Jamaica because almost 8 out of 10 children in this country report that they are exposed to violence either within the home or in the community.
8 out of 10.
Some children, 8 out of 10. But
Right?
I mean, it's a high number, violence in the home or in the community, or even at school. Um, and that's another adverse childhood experience is violence at school, like bullying. That children bully you, tease
Mm.
you, call your name and beat you up. A lot of us have gone through that. We don't even we it's a part. We thought is a part of life, and not realizing, or nobody never tell us that this is trauma, right?
Yes.
So as I go through the things that can be traumatic for children, or maybe considered to be adverse childhood experience for children, we realize how widespread this thing and how common it is, and how many persons
Yeah.
have been affected by this. So if
Mm.
the people listening to us tonight, I know a lot of them have gone through similar situation, right?
Wow.
And or know of children or have children who are experiencing these adverse childhood experiences. Now,
Mhm.
somebody may ask, so what's the big thing about it? It is important because they have done a lot of studies,
Yes.
and the studies have shown that these adverse childhood experiences or traumatic situation is very common. Yes, very
Mhm.
common. And um, they've done some studies in the USA which show that when a child, in fact, you can look at this situation. You see that when a child, let's say you're going through a park. I want to
Yes.
explain something. You're going through a walk through a park, or you walk down the road and you see a man with a pit bull.
Mhm.
You get frightened. Your heart start race, you start sweat, and 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 the body tell you that, look here, that is danger. Yes,
Yes.
and you kind of prepare yourself to either run, you get frightened, or you're gonna run. They talk about the flight or fright response. Yes, or you might even, when you see the dog, you freeze, you can't move, and
Mm.
that is called a stress. It is when we experience stress, that is what happened to the body. Yes, and the body produce a lot of chemicals in the brain that
Mhm.
that 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 affect different parts of the brain and so on. Now, when you walk and you see the dog and you get frightened, the the brain kind of kick in and say, look, you know, worry yourself. Say our man, I walk him dog, nothing gonna happen to you, and your body kind of
Your triggers.
it trigger you, but because you realize that the dog with the owner and that sort of thing, you kind of just calm down because
Mhm.
the brain kind of shut down. But a child, right, who who comes home every evening,
Yes.
yes, and when
Mhm.
he come home, is a pit bull in the house with that child. Yes, it
Mm.
means that day in, day out, every day that child is experiencing stress. Yes.
Mm.
And we call that toxic stress. We call it toxic stress because the body producing a whole heap of chemical in the brain that damage the brain over time. Not only damage the brain, but also damage the body. And
Wow.
children who, yes, go ahead, ask the question.
So, so you're saying if the child is in a house with even a pit bull, that can in itself create trauma for the child, stress and trigger.
Yes, but that was you. I using the example of the pit bull this how if you that pit bull could, when I use the example of the pit bull could be the adult who is sexually molesting the child, or the
Mm.
pit bull who is a parent, mother or father, who is beating up on that child every day, or cuss the child and
Mm.
call him all sort of name, or the pit bull
Mm.
um, maybe I use an example of the pit bull because the pit bull might be the stress that that child is experiencing every day, right? And
Yeah.
it's I use the example just to say you can only imagine the response of the person body every day when you're dealing with that situation day in, day out, every day, and how stress can affect the brain and the body, and children who are experiencing trauma every day of their life, yes, or most days, um as I explained before, that trauma, because of the chemicals that the body produce, it's going to affect the brain and the body entirely. And you may ask how it will affect them.
Mm.
Because of how it affect the body, you find that they're constantly being stressed out, right? Like the person who walk and see the pit bull, you're constantly being stressed out. And because of how it affect the brain now, you find children in situations like that, they're constantly expecting danger in their life, yes? And it play out in school. You find children in situations like that can't learn, they're not learning, they go school and them in the classroom and the teacher asks them a question and they're not concentrating or they're daydreaming because they're thinking about the danger at home. The
Wow.
stepfather who having sex with them and they can't talk to nobody, or
Mm,
the mother who is constantly beating them. That's a pit bull.
mm.
Yes. or or the person who is constantly calling them names. Yes. They have difficulty learning in school, or you may find a lot of situations in
It's an educational outcome.
bad educational outcome because they can't concentrate in class, or you find that the behavior is a big one. You find that they're constantly stressed out and constantly expecting danger. We use a big word. We say that in fact, you use the word, they're easily triggered. I think that's
Mm.
a term we use a lot. We're easily triggered.
So
Or
they
we
become,
use the word that they're emotionally dysregulated,
mm,
right? That means they're easily triggered. Anything can set them off, right? And so you find that these children in situations like that will always be, because they're easily triggered, them always fighting with other children,
yes.
always misbehaving,
Mm-hmm.
and we think are bad, the picnic them bad, when in truth and in fact they're sad because they're constantly being traumatized, or they're experiencing what we call adverse childhood experiences. Yes.
Mm.
Um,
So
um,
that
mm.
most times result in them being disruptive in schools. Most.
Disruptive in school, we sometimes, and then we go carry them to psychologists or psychiatrists because we think that something is wrong. Mark you, I'm not saying that every child I'm not saying that every child who is disruptive in school, every child that is acting out is being abused, right?
Mm.
What we're saying is that abuse can lead to these things. And so when we see these things happening in children, we should make sure that they are properly assessed and evaluated to make sure that all is well with them and to make sure they're not being abused or anything like that. But a lot of time, children who you find disruptive in class, children who is acting out and so on, they are in traumatic situation. They're experiencing a lot of trauma in their life. They're experiencing these adverse childhood experiences that we call ACEs.
So with your 30 years of medical practice, you see, Jamaica, it's very important that I do this because as a society we're suffering, and a lot of people think that if I don't discuss politics over here, they should not come to the class. But this is one of the things that is affecting our society, and I have to discuss it as we go forward. So if we have this situation, and over 30 years you have seen these many traumatic experiences, doc. Many of our households are disrupted because of many of these instances. How do we fix this situation?
All right. I'm not going to go to that quickly, but I think there's also another point I want to make is that
Yeah.
a lots of people who experience these adverse childhood experiences, it affect them not only in childhood, but long term. So you find that, so this the same studies that I tell you that they did in the USA, and I encourage people to go and Google it and read about the study. It showed that if you are experiencing a lot of trauma in life, it can lead to problems like
Mhm.
behavioral problem like alcohol and drug use. So that's
So I'll,
such, I mean,
mm,
youngsters, they find a smoke a lot of ganja and so on, right? Parents come to me all the time and say, Doc, I want you to fix this problem because my son or daughter use ganja, too much ganja, and it affecting their brain. And I have to tell them that, look here, addiction begins and it ends with pain. And a lot of time, and I repeat it, addiction begins and ends with pain. That a lot of time they're using the drugs because they're experiencing a lot of pain in their life.
repeat that.
Yes.
Huh?
Addiction begins and ends with pain.
Mm.
A lot of times you find people using whole heap of alcohol and cigarette, not cigarette, alcohol and drugs like ganja and them sort of thing.
Mm.
What they're using is if it treat the pain, We use the word self-medicate. Addiction begins and ends with pain. Even people who have problem with eating, overeating, and they get put on too much weight and that sort of thing. A lot of people struggling with their weight problem, you know. And again, the studies in the USA show that a lot of people struggling with their weight problem, that when you check it out, is abuse, a trauma from childhood that they're struggling with. People
Mm,
who've been sexually abused, verbally abused. The same sort of adverse childhood experiences that we spoke about can affect that. And then of course a lot of psychiatric problems like depression, um, depression, um, and other condition. There's another one we call post-traumatic stress disorder, that
mm,
people who have experienced a lot of trauma in their childhood are at risk for developing these problems. And you know, um, as a psychiatrist, I also have to deal with a lot of people who become suicidal or
mm,
may even attempt suicide. You find that them attempt suicide regularly, overdosing on tablet or cut themselves and that sort of thing. And when you look back in the past, and I'm talking about adults, big people, you look back in the past, one of
mm,
the things that has contributed to this is abuse as children,
mm.
especially sexual abuse. These experiences, you know, mess up people's mind bad, you know, right?
Wow.
And the truth about it, we bury the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right, in our brains and our body, and it causes a lot of diseases and problems down in life. Even the same study in America show that um, a lot of the lots of condition that people develop is
Yeah.
linked back to childhood trauma, right? Like high blood pressure, diabetes, and those things. And you
Mm,
may ask, but how trauma can affect all of that? But again, it has to do with the fact that when you go through experience a whole lot of trauma as children, the body produces these chemicals. One of
yeah.
them is a chemical called cortisol, and it affect the organs of the body, right?
Mm,
And create long-term problems, right? And not only does it cause long-term health problem, but it can lead to death. We find that people who are exposed to a lot of trauma end up
mm,
dying earlier in life. Yes.
mm,
Um, it granted, not everybody, you know, not everybody who experience trauma will will have all of these problems, but a
yeah.
lot of people do. And so you go back to the question you asked, how do we deal with things like this? Well, you know what the research, and we're talking about trauma in children, adverse childhood experiences. And what the research has shown us is that the thing that is most protective in the life of a child is having a trusting relationship with an adult,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you just have one person in your life, right, who is there for you, whether it's a mother, your father, or your grandmother, or a godmother, or somebody, just one at least trusting relationship, right? Somebody who can provide what we call a safe, secure, stable, and nurturing relationship, right?
Yeah.
Safe relation. And a lot of people listening will tell you, yes, they have had trauma in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, they grew up in a home where father beat mother all the time, or they grew up in a home where they were constantly being beaten. But what saved them is that they had somebody in their life that they could run to, like their grandmother, who would be there
Yes.
to protect them. That
Mm,
stable, secure, trusting relationship. That is what has saved a lot of people, you know, having
mm.
one person in your life just to be there for you, that you
Auntie,
can run to. Huh?
that little auntie, that little grandma, that
Yes,
little,
your grandmother who will just hug you and put you in her bed and say, just is all right, life will be better for you, and just to be there for you and to reassure you. That is why for many people, when the grandmother dead, they bawl and they fall apart, you know. And it's the
mm,
worst thing when, especially if they live outside the country and granny dead and then can't come to the funeral. It's very difficult for them, right? Because it was that person who was just there for them,
yes.
right? But certainly that is one of the things that, so that's why it's so important for us as parents to be there for our children and to protect them and to ensure that they are safe and they're living in a stable environment and they're secure, and we love them as much as possible, because when children grow in a situation like that, they find they have better outcome, they do better in school, they have better health in life, they're less likely to become criminal or engage in criminal activity, because they have a good somebody they can rely on in their life to provide love and affection and care for them.